I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're diving deep into Shakespeare's Hamlet. To be or not to be? That is the question. Well, we'll have that question answered, plus a whole lot more with an expert on Shakespeare. He's an amazing author. His name is Eric Richardson. His book is called Seeing Shakespeare, Hamlet, an analysis of Shakespeare's greatest play. It offers a comprehensive scene-by-scene analysis. So get ready to explore the historical, cultural, political, and religious contexts that shape this timeless masterpiece. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Great Writers Media for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Great to see you here today on Spotlight, Eric.
Good to see you, Logan. Thanks for having me.
So much of Shakespeare is embedded in our culture, from there's something rotten in Denmark, methinks thou dost protest too much, to what I just quoted, to be or not to be. It's good to have some context. It's good to have some understanding about where all this comes from, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think the difficulty beyond the language that Shakespeare used is also the context. The modern reader or the modern viewer is going to look at the play through the 21st century lens rather than the 16th century lens. And that, I think, is where the greater confusion comes from.
Absolutely. So understanding the context, understanding what words meant, what actions meant, what intentions were back in that era is vital to have a complete understanding, right?
Absolutely, for sure. For example, the religious confrontation that was going on between the Catholics and the Protestants. And so many scholars believe that Shakespeare was probably Catholic, but he had to keep it a secret because he could have been executed if he was discovered in England. And that comes out in the play as well.
Amazing. That's a cool fact that I didn't know about. That's for sure. I didn't even suspect he might be Catholic, and I guess that's why he had to keep it a hidden secret. Let me ask you this. Why do you feel Hamlet is Shakespeare's greatest play out of the dozens that he created?
Well, I think Hamlet is Shakespeare's greatest hero because
Mhm.
he is assaulted from so many different angles. So first of all, just the task of getting revenge, avenging his father's death, which means he has to kill the king. So that is a major problem in and of itself.
Yeah.
How do you kill the king that is now ruling over you, and who also happens to be your, we would say, father-in-law, but the Elizabethans would have seen Claudius as Hamlet's father.
Mm,
Okay, because when a man and woman get married, they become one person. So
right.
there would have been no understanding of a father-in-law. But
Right.
Claudius is Hamlet's father, which means that Hamlet has to kill his father in order to avenge his father. Um, the other thing is his conscience. He's a religious man, um, so he knows that killing Claudius would be wrong, but he's also a man, and for the play, he's Danish. He's probably got that Viking blood. He also
Mhm.
believes that revenge is right, and so he has that conflict, which is largely the cause of his hesitation. So many of my students want to know, why doesn't he just get on with it? Why doesn't he just do it? But he's really having this moral conflict within himself. The other problem is when he speaks to the ghost, and the ghost demands that he gets revenge. The ghost claims that he's in purgatory. Okay, well, Hamlet understands purgatory, but Hamlet's Protestant, so he doesn't
Mm,
believe in purgatory. So there's that confusion. Okay, plus, if the ghost is truly in purgatory, it means that he must renounce all sin.
mm,
But he's actually asking Hamlet to commit sin, which means he can't be in purgatory, which means that Hamlet doesn't know if he can trust the ghost, because
mm.
he does believe that the ghost could be a spirit from hell who's trying to condemn his soul. So, and the other thing is that the ghost tells him, I want you to get revenge, but don't hurt your mother. Well, if he kills Claudius, then his
Right.
mother's going to be upset. So there's just so many different conflicts that he has to manage It's overwhelming, and we don't see that in any of Shakespeare's other tragic heroes.
It's amazing. I think it's also what makes Hamlet so relatable in many ways is the fact that he's being confronted by so many different antagonists, right?
Right. The traditional hero story is pretty simple. Everybody knows who the bad guy is. The bad guy is definitely the bad guy, and the good guy is definitely the good guy. Shakespeare doesn't like to take that path. He likes to muddle the waters a little bit more. And in this particular play, he muddles them quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. You taught Shakespeare and you taught this play, Hamlet, for a couple of decades to high school students, right?
Correct. Yes.
Tell
So
us about
I
that.
was
I mean, I think of myself at 15 and glazed over when they talk to me about Beowulf.
right.
Um, and it's sometimes tough to get across to kids why this stuff is important and what it's all about, right?
Sure. Well, all I can say is the first time I taught the play, um, I know I did a terrible job. I was a student teacher at the time, and I had read the play in college. I liked the play, but I really didn't understand the play.
Mm,
And there's an old saying, I think, between English teachers that you have to teach something three times before you really can understand it as a teacher. So when I had the opportunity to teach AP Lit, and I knew I was going to be able to teach Hamlet, I was very excited because I wanted to try to redeem myself. But it did take a few years for me to feel comfortable with the play and understand it enough for myself that I could then pass that on to my students. And the wonderful thing is, every year I would see something new. Every year I would get a question that I never gotten before.
mm.
So it did show the enthusiasm of the students, but it really kept me enthusiastic as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's part of being a teacher that, experience counts,
Right.
experience matters, and learning the proper methodology to teach something as complex to wandering minds like the teenagers you were in charge of takes some expertise. Obviously, you've developed that now. You've actually tell us about this methodology that you have in your book to help us understand this play better. Give us like a
Well,
little overview of the outline of how it works and all that.
sure. The main thing, as I said previously, was context, that I have to try to get my students to understand what Shakespeare's audience was seeing
Mhm.
because they saw something that my 21st century students can't see, right? They're just not aware of that. So, for example, the thing with the ghost being in purgatory, that's not something that they would have thought of. Some of the Catholic students might have, felt a little click, when they heard the ghost. But the majority of students would not have garnered that. The fact that as Hamlet's new father, Claudius, marries his mother,
Mhm.
who was Claudius's sister. Um, that takes us back to English history when Henry VIII wanted to marry Catherine of Aragon, who was his brother's wife.
Mm.
And the Pope wanted to permit Henry to marry Catherine because he wanted that Spanish-English alliance to go oppose the French Protestants.
Mhm.
Okay, but the Pope had a very tough time. He had a lot of uh, I don't really want to say the Pope had enemies, but there were a lot of people objecting to it. You can't do that. So Catholic law says that a brother cannot marry his brother's wife.
Right.
Um, but Catherine had a reputation for her devotion. There were some rumors about Arthur, Hamlet's brother, or I should say Henry's brother. Um, and so Catherine stepped forward eventually and said, "Well, Arthur and I never consummated our marriage."
Mm.
Okay. And so the Pope said, "Great, you can marry Henry."
Mm.
Right. But that's something that you're not going to notice in the play. You're going to have to understand that from history.
Right. Now, you call your book Seeing Shakespeare.
Yes.
Why do you call it Seeing Shakespeare? It kind of makes me wonder if you think watching the play performed would
Right.
actually help you understand it more. Tell us about that.
Well, part of it, of course, is they're looking at the play on a page, a written
Right.
page. So they can see the words, but they can't really see always what's going on
Hmm.
because they have difficulty with the language. They don't quite understand the culture. They don't pick up on the nuances the way a teacher would. And again, it took me several years to get all of this
Yeah.
down. So I have to emphasize to them that what Shakespeare's audience would have seen
Hmm.
on the stage versus what the modern reader, the modern audience sees. I do think directors also tend to take some modern liberties as well because they want to appeal to the modern audience. So that can sometimes cause confusion. If they see a film of the play that isn't the whole play,
Right.
uh, they don't really get to see what Shakespeare intended. And plus, there are so many ways to interpret the play as well. So I'm sure that there are um, many English teachers who will read my book and be screaming at me as they read the book because they see things in a different perspective.
Absolutely. I understand this book in part was born out of a series of YouTube videos you created that helped explain Hamlet. Tell us about those.
Well, I was hoping to have a YouTube channel,
Mhm.
um, but when I realized that my scenes or my videos were going to run maybe 30 minutes or more.
Mhm.
And that's not your typical YouTube viewer.
Right.
So my wife suggested that I write a book instead of the YouTube channel. So I've written a book. I do have still, I think, a desire to develop either a YouTube channel or a podcast
Mhm.
so that I can talk directly to my readers and they can communicate with me as well.
Yeah, the beauty of the internet is it sounds like there wouldn't be a big audience for that. But if you consider you have the whole globe to choose from,
Sure.
all you need is, X number of people who are interested in Hamlet, and you've got a successful podcast, which is what's great about this digital era. Let's talk a little bit about the play. Claudius confesses to killing his brother slash the king, but you caution readers in your book not to judge him as evil. Apparently, this is a contextual thing as well. Tell us about that.
Well, it's an understandable impulse. Murder is evil, and to murder the king is evil, and to murder your brother is evil. The act itself is evil. But we see Claudius twice in the play express remorse, and he does this in situations where there's nobody else on stage.
Mm,
So he's not lying, right? This is what comes out of him twice. So an evil person doesn't feel remorse.
mm,
An evil person doesn't seek forgiveness. An evil person doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. So, although Claudius has committed an evil act, I caution my students not to judge him as evil. And I understand that that gets difficult as the play goes on and he starts plotting to kill Hamlet.
mm,
But I also say that he's afraid. He's a
mhm.
coward. He's afraid that Hamlet's going to expose him and he's going to die, which is a very human reaction.
Right,
Right? And so it's difficult for us to put ourselves in the place of the bad guy, right?
right,
We can easily take the place of the good guy.
right.
Um, but I encourage my students to be more forgiving of all of these characters. None of them are perfect. They all have their problems and their difficulties. Um, and if they open themselves up to that, I think they'll get more from the play.
Yeah. Well, and also they'll get more out of life if you start being a critical thinker like that, where you just don't accept on face value things that are written and your knee-jerk reaction. I think you get more of a nuanced approach to literature, to people, and to life, right? You mentioned in the book the humanity of Shakespeare's characters. Tell us what you mean and which characters display their humanity.
And well, one of my favorite authors is Flannery O'Connor.
Mhm.
So great Catholic writer. And she said that the difference between a good book and great literature is that good books are topical.
Mhm.
So Right now, the transgender issue is the topic of the time. And there
Mhm.
are a lot of really good books coming out dealing with transgenderism. But 10 years from now, our country, our community would have absorbed that and we would have moved on to something else.
Mhm.
Okay. The next topic to come along. O'Connor says that human nature is universal and it's eternal. It never changes. And so it's endlessly fascinating. We as humans have tremendous capacity for good, and we can do good things to our own detriment, right? We can give a beggar the last $5 we have.
Mhm.
Okay. On the other side, we can do tremendously awful things,
Sure.
like murder your own brother, like murder your king. And so that complexity of humanity is just endlessly fascinating. Okay. And it is really at the heart of all the great literature that we see going back to the Greeks and biblical times. And so it's a topic, a theme that never gets old because I think we are continually surprised by our own goodness and our own evil.
Very, very interesting indeed. You
Mhm.
spend a few pages, quite a few pages actually, discussing Horatio. Why so much time is dedicated to a minor character?
Well, I think he was my student's favorite character
Okay.
um, because he loves Hamlet and Hamlet loves him, and we can see that friendship. And so, a story many years ago, the Royal Shakespeare Company was doing an American tour,
Mhm.
and they were playing Hamlet at the Kennedy Center. Very excited with some of my English teacher friends to go see the play. And by intermission, I was fuming. So I dashed out to the lobby and I said, where's Horatio? Why isn't Horatio in the play? Now he was there, he was
Mhm.
on stage, but he wasn't saying anything. And I couldn't believe it. And my friends couldn't believe it. We were all very frustrated that Horatio wasn't being Horatio. So when I got home, I pulled my anthology off the shelf and I started flipping through, and Horatio's not really there very much. He really
Wow.
is a minor character. And I was stunned. But then I realized that my fondness for Horatio and my belief that he was a larger character came mostly from Kenneth Branagh's film, because he
Mm.
puts Horatio in many, many scenes where Shakespeare did not. Um, and so I was a little frustrated at myself for falling into that trap, but it did make me rethink Horatio. And when I went back and looked at him more closely, um, I, I I do think he loves Hamlet, and I
Mm.
think he tries very hard to be Hamlet's friend, but he fails Hamlet at key points in the play.
Mm.
For example, in Act Three, when Hamlet threatens the king, right?
Mm.
He doesn't do it on purpose, right? And Claudius understands that Hamlet now knows the truth,
Mm.
right? And after the play breaks up, Hamlet is very giddy. Horatio, did you see? Did you see the king? He revealed his guilt. And what Horatio should say is, Hamlet, you just threatened the king in front of the whole court. You need to pull yourself together,
Right.
right? But he doesn't say that. He just says, yeah, I saw. And then later in Act Five, when Hamlet returns to Denmark, he's telling Horatio about how he had Rosencrantz and Guildenstern executed by the English. Now, these guys aren't very likable. My students don't like them very much, but they're not bad guys. They're not evil
Mhm.
guys. They just want to serve their king. And if you don't serve the king, you die. Um, and they don't know that Claudius intends to have Hamlet executed by the English. There's no way they could possibly know that. But Hamlet manipulates Claudius's letter, and he has Rosencrantz and Guildenstern
Mm.
murdered by the English. And Horatio's only response is, so Rosencrantz and Guildenstern go to it. And
Mm.
for many years, I read that statement as a question, that Horatio was troubled. Really? You killed those guys? But this time when I was reading the play for this book, I realized it's not a question. There's a period there. It's a statement. Horatio feels nothing as well.
Mm.
Okay. And so as I thought about it, And I thought about Hamlet's struggle with faith. How could he do these terrible things if he is a man of such strong faith? And I believe that what Shakespeare is doing with Horatio is setting up Horatio as a foil. Hamlet, through his play, is struggling with his faith.
Mm,
Um, Many writers see the play as Shakespeare's struggle with faith.
mhm.
And I think he's using Horatio as a man who has completely lost his faith and therefore cannot give his friend the help that his friend really needs.
Oh. It's a fascinating analysis, that's for sure. And it also shows how important interpretation is, the
Sure.
interpretation of the reader, the interpretation of the actor. Like you said, a question mark or a period could make all the difference in the world as to what a line means. And when you have a play like this, every line is important. Nothing is a throwaway. Is there any part of the play that you don't like, anything you wish Shakespeare had done differently, perhaps?
I really do wish that he had said it a little bit more, given us a little bit more insight into Gertrude's relationship with her husband, Hamlet's father. We hear about Hamlet's father, but we don't hear very much. Hamlet doesn't recall any memories of being with his father, other than the fact that he was king. Um, Hamlet gives us a beautiful scene where Hamlet talks about Yorick, his father's jester, and how Yorick carried him around on his back and gave him piggyback rides and played with him. And
Mhm.
it's just a joyous moment for Hamlet. And it's, wait a minute, there's Hamlet's father figure, the Joker, the jester, the court fool. Okay.
Mm.
Not old Hamlet. Um, so I would like to have seen a little bit more about Hamlet's father, other than the fact that he was a warrior. We just don't get anything else. Hamlet
Mm.
does say that Gertrude would hang herself on her husband as if she worshiped him, but we don't know if that's true or if that's just Hamlet recalling some, scattered moments where he saw his mother and father together because he didn't see them together very much because his father was never around. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that.
Very interesting. Doing your research for the book, were there any surprises, any surprising discoveries that you made?
Well, I'm one of those people who I like reading essays about plays and about literature as much as I like reading the literature themselves. They're just brilliant people. And one of the scholars that I really love is a man called Dover Wilson.
Hmm.
And he has a crazy theory about this play. And a lot of scholars out there mock him for this. But he believes that Shakespeare forgot to put in one uh, stage act, okay,
Hmm.
um, where Hamlet appears on stage very briefly, sees Claudius and Polonius and Gertrude plotting, and steps back.
Mm.
Okay. There's nothing in any of the plays that says at that moment, enter Hamlet.
Right.
Okay. So Dover Wilson says clearly Shakespeare forgot to put it in because he didn't really need stage directions because he was right there. He could tell
Right.
his actors what he needed to do. But in that moment, when Hamlet sees those three characters together, he starts to eavesdrop,
Mm.
right? And he hears how they're going to use Ophelia to manipulate Hamlet into revealing what's wrong with him. Okay. I think it's brilliant, right?
Mm.
And it makes what Hamlet says after the famous nunnery scene where he berates Ophelia. Um, it makes all of that make sense because we understand now that Hamlet heard Claudius and Polonius plotting. And so when Hamlet confronts Polonius, he does it in a way that Polonius doesn't understand that Hamlet knows, but we know. So that was one of the things I learned. There's just so many great writers. Harold Goddard, who thinks that the play is Shakespeare's crisis of faith. Okay, that he was struggling with his own faith at the time, and that's why he gave us this hero, Hamlet, who was so difficult to understand.
What is the significance of the play within a play, the mousetrap in Hamlet's plan to uncover Claudius's guilt?
Uh, I think the significance as a play is that Hamlet's plan works.
Mhm.
He actually does get to see Claudius reveal himself. The problem is nobody else who's present does see that, except maybe Horatio, but Horatio doesn't really respond to it anymore. All that the audience sees, and that is in the court there on stage, is they see Hamlet threatening the king. They see Hamlet acting like a madman, okay? Which, um, even though we understand why Hamlet's doing it, he puts himself in a very bad position within the kingdom, right? So now everybody is looking at Hamlet suspiciously, and everybody is suspecting Hamlet of maybe having designs on the throne himself.
How do Hamlet's interactions with Ophelia contribute to the play's exploration of madness and love?
Wow. Um, Ophelia is one of Shakespeare's beautiful creations. He has three motherless heroines. Ophelia is the youngest. Desdemona is motherless. Cordelia and King Lear is motherless, and they're all wonderful, and they're, I think, miraculous creations. Um, my students were troubled by the relationship because they find out that midway through the play that Hamlet's 30 years old. And of course, they then ask me how old's Ophelia, and I have to tell them most scholars think she's 16.
Hmm.
And so
Wow.
they're really turned off by that. They're very, very upset about that. Although I explained to them that would have been normal, right? So if you had a daughter, you would not want her, you would want her to marry an older man who was in a position to take care of her, right? So, and if you were an older man, you wanted a younger wife, hopefully to have more children, particularly
Hmm.
since childbirth was so hazardous, both for the mothers and the children. Um, my students always wanted to know, does Hamlet really love Ophelia? And I think he does. And I say that because that's the only way to explain his fury
Mhm.
when when she takes part in the plot to unmask him. And she's innocent. The queen has told her that she's the reason Hamlet has gone mad because he's in love with you and your father made you break up with him and that's what's driving him mad. So if that's true, you can cure Hamlet. And Gertrude even hints at the fact that there might be a marriage there as well.
Hmm.
So poor innocent Ophelia gets caught up in this terrible situation where she has to help her father and the king plot against the man she loves. Hamlet explodes
Mhm.
uh, because he's hurt,
Yeah.
right? He should know better that it's not her. She's only going to do what her father tells her to do. But it's an awful scene to watch, and it's the beginning of Ophelia's fall into madness herself. And I do think that very famous madness scene um, lets us understand how far Hamlet has fallen as well, because at the end of the play, he doesn't really have much to say about her.
Hmm.
At the funeral scene, he does leap into her grave and shouts, "I loved Ophelia." But at that point, we're not really sure how truthful he's being. Right? Um, uh, so it is a tragic love component um, that I guess I wish Shakespeare had made not so tragic. Uh,
Hmm.
but Ophelia, like her counterparts that Shakespeare created, Cordelia and Desdemona, that's the role that they play.
Hmm.
And that is what arguably is what makes the play so tragic, is you have this one innocent, truly innocent figure in the play, and she loses her life.
But your students are blessed to have you because obviously you've given this so much thought, and obviously you've written the book about it now. Shakespeare is one of 30, Hamlet rather, is one of 39 of Shakespeare's plays. Can we see a series coming like this? Perhaps you'll move on to another play?
I sure hope so. I've tentatively started King Lear.
Okay.
And King Lear is the I guess partner play. Harold Goddard says that King Lear is the miracle play and shows Shakespeare's redemption, that he's overcome his own conflicts with faith. And I think the play does show that. I don't know the play as well. I taught it on alternating years. So I haven't read it as many times as I read Hamlet, but it's a play I also love. So I think that's coming out next.
Well, we're looking forward to that. Eric Richardson has written an amazing book that'll help you look at Shakespeare in a different way, perhaps the correct way. You'll understand the context of the language, the context of the situations, both political, religious, and historical. The name of the book is called Seeing Shakespeare, Hamlet, an analysis of Shakespeare's greatest play. It is a comprehensive scene-by-scene analysis. So get ready, and you will, by reading this book, explore the historical, cultural, political, and religious contexts that shaped this timeless masterpiece. Eric, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, Logan. I had a great time.
I had a great time talking to you as well. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.